Right, back live tonight here on In Focus. August marks Women's Month in South Africa, and tonight we're focusing on women who are making waves in the male-dominated industry of aviation. Joining us is South African Civil Aviation Authority CEO, Khoza, who was elected by the International Civil Aviation Organization member states as president last year for the 41st Assembly. Also speaking to us is International Air Services Council chairperson Nomveliso Ntanjana and pilot and certified grade 2 instructor at Tintswalo Mabunda. Good to have you. Thank you very much for coming on for this conversation tonight. Let's start with you. I mean, we characterize it as a male-dominated industry, but you are now the CEO and the president. Is it still a male-dominated environment, or is the fact that you are appearing now in those critical spaces indicative of a change that is happening in aviation?
Thank you very much. Good evening, Thabo, and good evening to the phenomenal women who are on this platform. I celebrate you in this Women's Month and all women of South Africa. But Thabo, yes, it is still a male-dominated environment. For the fact that you've just indicated that I was elected to be the president of the 41st Assembly of the International Civil Aviation Organization, a first woman globally in 2022, because the appointment was, of course, in 2022 in October, as a matter of fact. And in the establishment of that institution, which has been in existence this year, it will be 79 years. They've had the first president in 78 years. It speaks volumes. For the fact that I am the first woman director or CEO of the Civil Aviation Authority, again, is indicative that we have not even scratched the surface. My sense is that at some point we will have to stop talking about the first this and the first that, and make it normal that there will be a woman CEO, there will be a woman pilot, a woman chairperson of the International Air Service Licensing Council, and so on. And just normalize it. You know, our kids, as they grow up, you know, they learn about these things. And to them, it does not make sense because they're growing up in a different environment altogether. And we don't want them to contend with the similar issues as we are, you know, dealing with now. So it is still a male-dominated environment. We're talking about, I think Tintswalo will talk about the statistics of women pilots, which hover around 4 or 5%. The numbers, they fluctuate from time to time. And when we talk from a racial perspective, it's 10% blacks, which will include coloreds and Indians, and of course black people, and then 90%. So we're dealing with a double-edged sword, you know, being a black female who has to deal with the racial issues, but also have to deal, you know, with the gender issues. So we still have a way to go.
Tintswalo, let's bring you in. Does that 4% make sense to you in terms of why it is, especially considering, you know, the kind of structural challenges that you had to overcome? And by the way, we must not talk about structural challenges as if it's some abstract thing. We actually should name them and actually say, what are these structural challenges that you had to deal with to make it into that space?
Hi, good evening, Mr. Thabo, and good evening to your viewers. The challenges that faced mostly, it's not necessarily structural challenges per se. It would be the fact that initially aviation was recognized as a male-dominated industry. And secondly, another challenge would be considered to be a financial challenge. The 4% doesn't necessarily make sense because we as women need to also be part of this industry. But as stated, the financial challenge is the major challenge that restricts women from being in this industry and taking over as well.
Yeah. What do you say to people who still find you an exception to the rule, and when they look at it, oh, you're a woman pilot, wow, that's big, as opposed to seeing it as a normal achievement?
Well, being seen as a female pilot, it should become a norm, like Sis Poppy Khoza has already said. We shouldn't be necessarily worried about where or what you come from or what you look like. But I get that a lot wherever I find myself and people ask me what I do for a living, and I tell them that I am a pilot or a flight instructor. They are always in awe of the fact that I am a woman, because they think that women are unable to do this job or this career. But it's an easy job for women as well. There are no restrictions physically to restrict women from being able to do this as well.
Yeah. Nomveliso, let's bring you in here. And Sis Pope will tell us a little bit more about how she achieved the diversity that we are seeing at SACA. 50% of women serving as executives. But if Nomveliso, we look at the International Air Services Council, what is the diversity ratio there, and what are you doing as far as changing those kind of numbers?
Okay, so thanks very much, Thabo, and good evening to you and viewers at large. So most of what we're doing as the International Air Services Council is to regulate the industry in terms of licensing them and giving them, it's a complex issue. It's licensing and also giving permits to airlines that are foreign registered, but you license the ones that are in. But in terms of diversity and if you have to equate the scales, I think it talks to both of them, to what Tintswalo has said, as also Poppy. We are far from that, and coming to think of it, I think in terms of control and ownership of the industry, I doubt if we're at 20%, if we would be lucky to be there. In ownership, I think there would be one or two airlines that are really managed and owned or controlled by blacks. But besides that, I think we need to look at it in the perspective of saying we are here now. So what more, and how do we move on, forward? And what are the gaps that we've identified up to date, and how do we cover those gaps?
Yeah.
From our side, we have the intervention.
Very important while you're there that we are here now.
Yes.
Was it your intention? Did you set out to be there? And when you got there, what was a goal that you had set for yourself, that when I get there, this is what I want to do?
South Africa is a dynamic. The country we are today. We have our own challenges, in terms of the history, in terms of, demographically, in every challenge. So when we got there, firstly, we're a regulated entity as the International Air Services Council. So we are operating through a law, and it's up to us. I think you have to be also, as a council, we don't really update the law as fast as we can in terms of in line with the evolution of the world. Let me put it that way. So, as a council, you need to think broadly as a regulator to say, this is what the legislation that we have. This is the capacity we have, and how do we ensure that we balance, balance the scales. I mean, if I were to get to the act that we are working on, it was established in 1993, I think, with its regulations in 1994. So it kind of predated most of the employment equity, the BEE, and all of that. So, but regardless, you just have a way of dealing with these issues. We do considerations of the airlines now and again as they come in to us for applications. So we look at those issues, mainly BE, mainly employment equity, mainly capacitating young pilots, and all of that. But I think Upopi will also talk more about the strategies that they have as CAA in upskilling and also inducting the public about the aviation sector.
Yeah.
But we also do our part, in line with what the Act can allow us to do.
So, Ms. Poppy, I mean, normally we talk to you when you are being very powerful in your position and you are downing airlines. You're not going to fly anywhere. We are downing you until you fulfill 1, 2, or 3. But it's interesting to have all of you 3 here, and I wonder at your level, maybe not publicly, but at least behind the scenes, do you have a conversation around yourself to say, how do we get more women owning airlines? How do we get more women getting into the council? How do we get more women getting into the spaces of becoming instructors?
So, yes, of course we do. And by the way, I know you said that on a lighter note, but it's important for us as a regulator, Thabo, that when you get on board that aircraft, there must be a degree of certainty that you are going to arrive at your destination safe.
No, absolutely.
So when we ground those aircraft, we do them to protect the flying public and to make sure that we preserve the good record that South Africa holds in terms of its zero accident rate, which fares extremely well internationally. But back to the question that you've asked about the conversations, of course, we do. We are led by a very dynamic minister, the Minister of Transport, who is pro-transformation, pro-women. So when we have these discussions, she would have, dialogues from time to time with her and the leaders of the industry. What is very key that I must highlight tonight as part of the discussion is that our government and the Department of Transport or the ministry took a decision that we are going to have all our state-owned entities in aviation led by women. And they've done that. The Civil Aviation Authority is led by myself and a woman. The Airports Company South Africa is led by another woman. Air Traffic and Navigation Services is led by another woman. The chairperson of the the International Air Service Licensing Council is here with us, led by a woman. So leadership is really at the center of wanting to see change and wanting to see change now. Because we've got this beautiful legislation, Employment Equity Act, Labor Relations Act. There's absolutely nothing that South Africa doesn't have. In fact, we are also expected to report on a quarterly basis to the Department of Employment and Labor in terms of how far have we progressed in advancing, the employment equity agenda, which at the center of it is race, but women as well. So leadership to me is very key, which is why at the Civil Aviation Authority, together with my team, we took a deliberate decision that we are going to transform our entity to achieve the 50% parity. And we've done that. In fact, we are sitting at 51% females, 49% males. In a highly technical environment, something that was unheard of in civil aviation.
Yeah.
The board of directors, they said they want to see 50% female executives. We've got 50% female executives, and so it goes. So it's really deliberate leadership and wanting to do it, because it not only is it a moral thing to do, but it is a right thing to do. So to me, everything rises and falls on leadership. And if leaders are given positions, but they don't make an impact, they don't make that change, I think it's leadership wasted. Yeah. And I'm glad that I'm part of that team that has that foresight to say we can't have the status quo. If you look at the civil aviation across the board, I spoke about the pilot statistics, for instance, but you will find that the trend is exactly that. The chairperson now, Nomveliso, was talking about where are the women-owned airlines. Some have come on board, but I don't think they were given adequate support.
Yes.
And I think we need to frame the conversation now differently to say it's no longer just about the skills, but also we must support women-led businesses, especially in key and strategic sectors such as significantly on the socio-economic developmental issues
right.
of the country. People don't walk to South Africa.
Yes.
Tourists, they don't walk to South Africa, they fly to South Africa.
Yeah.
So we've got to make this industry to be as inclusive as possible so that it is not a taboo tomorrow that we have an airline that is owned by a black female or that is owned by a white female for that matter.
Yeah.
Because I can tell you now, the issues of gender, in our country, in many cases, they really don't know any color.
Yeah.
We've got the similar challenges. In fact, globally, women are not given equal opportunities everywhere you go. We have these discussions. We're in Senegal. Thabo, I'm sorry, I'm taking much of your time.
No problem.
2 weeks ago, and we challenged each other as the CEOs of civil aviation authorities to say, but we talk about the evolution. We talk about remotely piloted aircraft systems, urban air mobility, cyber security issues, and so on. What is the role of women in all these things? I can promise you that we didn't really have the answers. But this is a discussion now that is on the table, on the agenda, and we must make it possible for the African continent, for our country, and globally as well.
Right, back live with you tonight as we continue to commemorate Women's Month, and the focus today being on women in aviation. CEO of the South African Civil Aviation Authority, Khoza, International Air Services Council chairperson, Nomveliso Ntanjana, as well as Tintswalo Mabunda, who is a pilot and an instructor. So, Tintswalo, let's come back to you. I mean, Sis Poppy is talking at, if you look at the barrier timeline model, maybe at a level higher. You're talking about management entry. Let's take it down a little bit and talk maybe about workforce entry, right? Where things that become barrier, for example, how do you get around them? Uniform design, which is largely designed for men. You talk about hiring practices. You talk about the ability to have a voice when it comes to collective bargaining, and you talk about, I suppose, the lack of commitment to gender balance at that level. Tintswalo, hope you heard me there.
Hi, sorry, I did not get that. Can you please say that again?
Let's talk about the barriers to entry at a workforce entry and what you experienced. I mentioned things like how uniforms are designed. As I don't know if things have changed today, but for example, uniforms are designed largely to accommodate men. You've got hiring practices that are geared towards men. You've got very little commitment, it seems, towards gender balance as far as leadership is concerned. All right, we're going to have a challenge there with that particular line. All right, let me try with Nomveliso. Nomveliso, let's bring you in here in terms of the idea of what you're raising, right? Women-owned airlines. Previously, when we have these conversations, we talk about STEM, and we talk about whether there were very little women who were taking STEM subjects. And I'm glad Sis Poppy is saying we must move away from this question of skill. It's no longer about skill now. It's about something else. It's about barriers to entry when it comes to finance. So how do we tackle that question of finance, as much as we're saying we have a rather progressive minister in transport?
I think integration would work better for this industry to help it grow even female, or the few female owned, or to grow the female person into the industry, because the industry itself is highly regulated, and its regulation is it's regulated in terms of financing, on how you must operate. I mean, the whole value chain of aviation is highly regulated, and there's a lot of expenses involved. And getting back to the issue of education, you need to educate, and people, I think most people, they get to know of aviation entry requirements. I'll make an example at a very old, at a matured or a late stage of the education system. And whilst most of the time, I think you need to get to know about aviation and develop interest at a very young age, probably from grade 9, I think. That would be the best timing of getting into the industry. So, given those are barriers I can think of, and how do we resolve the barriers? It would mean that there must be integration of various departments of government, as Poppy earlier said. I guess small business department will have to come in and fund the aviation sector. Fund young graduates or young scholars who want to be pilots in the future and everything, because there are levels of it, but every level, there's money for every level for one to qualify as such.
So expand on that, because we are talking broadly, and somebody might be listening to us and saying we're only talking, for example, about being a pilot, or maybe we're talking about being an airports company CEO. But what are the opportunities that are existing within the aviation space that certainly you need to expose your children to, from the ages, others are saying, from even 9 years old, maybe a little bit higher age, 11, to about 18?
There's a lot of disciplines within the aviation industry. That's why I'm saying I think UPOP and CAA, that they are running a lot of summits, that are educational, to even the Department of Transport. Actually, they are having a lot of educational summits that they are running, and whereby they would even invite schools. They would bring various education or professional advisors, for different professions in the aviation industry. But if maybe I would say, can we ask ourselves if that is fast enough, or are we still lagging here and there? As I said earlier, it's not an easy thing. It's not an easy process. There's a lot of engagements that have to be done, but gradually we are getting there. Young people are being taught and are being trained and being introduced into aviation industry in various ways. Poppy, I think you can.
So, I see you nodding your head as far as the plethora of opportunities within the aviation space that we need to begin to expose, particularly to the younger generation, as early as possible.
Which is why we started with the career awareness. We visit schools. This week, for Thabo, my team will be visiting schools. We do that on a weekly basis. We do have what we call an A to Z booklet, which has all careers in aviation, from pilots we've spoken about, air traffic controllers, aeronautical engineers, aircraft maintenance engineers. We have aviation medicine doctors. We have doctors who specialize on aviation medicine. There are aviation lawyers. There are people who are responsible for designing airspace designing. So it's a lot. So I would ask that the viewers perhaps can also access our website under aviation careers. That is where they can find information. But we tiptoe across all 9 provinces of our country, visiting a number of schools, partnering with Department of Basic Education, with the Department of Transport and public entities, where we start to have a discussion about and introduce aviation careers to the young learners. Basic education, by the time they finish, majority of the learners ordinarily know about what else is available in civil aviation. But a step further is that in 2014, 2015, we then started a bursary program to an extent of, entering into partnerships with our international counterparts, where we send pilots to, abroad to go and study there. Not that in South Africa there are no training schools, but it is good because aviation in its nature is a global environment for exposure, for cultural exchanges, but also to benchmark as to where are we not getting things right. I'll make you a practical example. which has been a frustration. Perhaps Tintswalo will have her story to tell, like many other pilots would, where they would, enroll in our schools, but it will take them forever to finish. We took a deliberate decision as the authority to also trial and see what is happening abroad. We entered into an MOU with France. We've sent the first batch of students who passed in record time. They came back, they're busy now with their conversion to be gainfully employed in South Africa.
Yeah.
We've entered into MOUs with some of the airlines who have said, we want to partner with you in terms of ensuring that, one, we create spaces for women, but two, we give them employment after they've done their on-the-job training. So there is a lot that we are doing with the like-minded, companies who are also coming on board to say we are heeding the call of ensuring that women are not left behind. And I must salute, some of those airlines that have come on board, putting themselves out there to say, we will partner with you, Civil Aviation Authority. As you train these pilots, as you train these aeronautical engineers, we would be happy to absorb them. And this is a call that we are making to the industry as well.
Yeah.
To say transformation is not a government imperative, but it is an imperative for each and every company who operates in South Africa.
That sounds really great. And sorry to jump in there, because I want Tintswalo to just come in and talk exactly about that. I don't know how much of it you were able to hear, but in terms of now that you're an instructor, right, there are challenges that you have met. Do you find that the situation is getting better in terms of organizational support? Sis Poppy mentioning a number of organizations that are now making a commitment to deliberately assist pilots that are coming in to finish their training in the times that are allocated and not extended any further than necessary. And it speaks to the question of organizational support. Are you yourself, even now as an instructor, deliberately looking at that situation where the environment supports those who are training to be able to complete?
Yes, we are actually looking into those things. The company that I currently work for, or the flight academy that I work for, it actually does some outreaches to rural areas where we inform young upcoming aspiring pilots, for example, about the aviation industry. So we are in line with what Sis Poppy is saying, that it does not only just take the government, but also other organizations within the sector that will help to encourage or give back to the community at large. And for example, myself, I was a sponsored pilot. When I started my piloting career, I was sponsored by TITA, for example, which is a company that helped to sponsor me financially in order to become a commercial pilot. And I was able to carry on my training to become a flight instructor in the company that I work for, which is Makwan Aviation Academy. So they also give back to the community at large by doing outreaches. We need those things to happen in order to help in the industry.
Yeah. And where you are now, Nomveliso, at that space, and I'm sure you still have aspirations and desires to grow even further into the industry, but is there adequate professional development support within this space for areas, I suppose, where you are heading to and where you want to be?
Okay, so I'm a lawyer by profession, so I'm in the aviation industry. So adequacy of the skill, as I said earlier, Thabo, it's a highly regulated profession. So whether you are a professional or you are a technical engineer or a technical professional in any respect, you still have to have the relevant qualifications. So I think for me the qualifications are enough, but there's just no way of skipping what you're supposed to have in the aviation industry. That's what I've learned. And the point is, how do you get to the skill and qualification that you need to have? This I was talking about a need to fund more of of anyone with interest in that in the industry. So that's how it is.
All right, and this, Poppy, as we wrap up the conversation, I mean, as you mentioned, it's not a South African thing. I think I saw a stat that even in the International Aviation Authority, it's only 8% who are women who are actually occupying executive positions. Executive development, you spoke earlier on about deliberate leadership, but deliberate professional development?
I think it goes hand in hand, because leaders, they do need empowerment too. So executive development is of paramount importance. But let me also just indicate, Thabo, that, as I was indicating earlier, really the time of talking about these issues is over now. We must just act because we can. I had a discussion about 2 days ago with very influential women. And one of them was saying, because one of the things that, some of our learners are being socialized is that, civil aviation is not a career that, it's not everyone who's cut out for it. Which to me, why only in South Africa do we have such a notion? When you go across, if you look at Ethiopia, for instance, all pilots there, they are, African black pilots. But in our country, there are these, you spoke about structural issues. There are serious structural issues in our country. Some of them we can touch, some of them you can't touch. For instance, the treatment by some of our schools. Who wouldn't necessarily prioritize black learners. And it's sad because we've seen it. We provide bursaries. So when I talk about this, I'm not talking about things that I'm dreaming about. It's a reality because we send some of these students to these schools. There is a big issue of transformation in aviation schools. Almost all of them are white-owned. There are these, things that you can't hold, where when, black students try to penetrate and get into this industry, they just can't cut it. And one thing that they get told is that, no, but this industry is not for you. Flying is not for everyone. And we've got to have serious and honest discussions about why is it transformation an issue? Because remember I said we're dealing with a double-edged, issue here, racial as well as gender. And we are hosting the National Aviation Gender Summit on the 25th of August. And we will be having a discussion on these issues with the industry leaders, because there are these barriers of entry that you can't see. It's like the glass ceiling. You can't see the ceiling, but it's there. And some of these women can't penetrate that glass ceiling because it's man-made. It's just made for women not to penetrate. And we've got to really have honest discussions about what do we do about these issues and act decisively against any form of prejudice, against any woman who has aspirations and they're being prevented to take up spaces that they want to. As I was saying, I wouldn't want my daughter to deal with my issues. I have my own stories to tell, Thabo. You would open Google. Some of the ladies here, they do know the prejudices I suffered as a black woman. I was told I can't do this. I'm not a pilot. I can't lead. What do I know? And so on. And my experiences are being experienced by women such as Tintswalo. Maybe Tintswalo might not have experienced that. But if I were to invite you, Thabo, to our gender summit on Friday, you will hear for yourself the prejudices that still persist in this aviation sector, which is why it is not transforming. We are leading in transformation as the Civil Aviation Authority, but you are equally challenging the entire industry to do likewise. because skills are in abundance in our country. We have pilots who are sitting at home who don't have any employment because somebody somewhere has taken a decision that we are not going to appoint women, we are not going to appoint black women or females, and so on and so on. Many pilots who have been trained are sitting at home with about 250 hours, and there's a gap that they still need to cover. And the question is, why are we not dealing with this type of prejudice? The truth of the matter is that in civil aviation, there is still prejudices, and we've got to confront them head on and make it possible for any woman who is in a position of Tintswalo or who is an aeronautical engineer. Our skills are leaving our country. Yeah. Some of them, they've decided that let's go and look elsewhere. The Middle East is absorbing. Asia is absorbing. But in our country, the numbers are really not moving. And this is made to be possible by someone somewhere who has decided. Some of the airlines here, they've taken a decision that they are not going to be appointing black pilots, and they don't have. If they tell you that we have black pilots in our airline, it's just for political correctness, maybe 2 or 3. These are the realities of civil aviation in our country, and we've got to change that. We have changed it as a regulator. We need to change it in the industry.
Ladies, I appreciate you. Yes. Thank you very much for coming on, and that's where we're going to have to leave it on that note this evening. That is the South African Civil Aviation Authority CEO there, Khoza International Air Services Council Chairperson, Nomveliso Ntanjana, and Tintswalo Mabunda, who is a pilot and an instructor, looking at their lived experiences, their professional encounters, but also what they are doing to disrupt in that space, to create more space for women in aviation.